All right, let's talk about a football legend. A guy whose incredible career, full of just absolute brilliance, is so often boiled down to one single heartbreaking moment. This is the story of Roberto Baggio. You know, his story makes you ask a really fascinating question. How is it possible that your greatest failure could actually become your defining triumph? I know, it sounds like a total contradiction, right? But Baggio's life is maybe the perfect example of this very idea. So to really get our heads around this, we have to start with the moment itself, the one everyone remembers. Let's go back to Pasadena, California for the 1994 World Cup final. Okay, picture this. The date is July 17th, 1994. The stadium is the legendary Rose Bowl. It's Italy versus Brazil for the biggest prize in all of football. They've played for 120 minutes, not a single goal, so it all comes down to a penalty shootout. And the hopes of an entire nation, they're resting on the shoulders of their best player, Roberto Baggio. He steps up to the spot, and he misses. The ball just sails over the crossbar. And just like that, it's all over. Brazil are world champions. The image that's burned into everyone's memory is Baggio just standing there alone, hands on his hips, head down, while the Brazilians celebrate all around him. It was a moment of just absolute public devastation. But that's not where his story ends. No way. In a lot of ways, that's where it really begins. See, to understand why a moment like that didn't completely break him, you have to understand the man who took that kick and the incredible rise of a true football genius. I mean, his early career just shows you how fast he shot to the top. He joins a youth academy at 13, and he's making his professional debut at just 15 years old. And get this, he suffers a knee injury that could have ended his career right there, but he still gets signed by a huge club, Fiorentina, at 18. By the time he's 23, he's the most expensive player on the planet. This wasn't just about talent. This was a kid with unbelievable resilience right from the start. And it wasn't just hype either. The man had a kind of magic you just can't teach. Take his famous goal against Napoli back in 1990. Someone described it as a mesmeric solo run in which he beat 5 or 6 defenders before slotting the ball into the net. That's not coaching. That's pure raw genius. It's the kind of thing that makes you a national hero. And that world record fee we mentioned, £8 million. Back in 1990, that was an astronomical amount of money. It was so huge that when he was sold from Fiorentina to their biggest rivals, Juventus, the entire city of Florence basically erupted in riots. People were devastated. That's how much he meant to them. But you know, the player we saw on the pitch, that was only part of the picture. To really, truly understand Roberto Baggio, you have to look at his inner life, the man behind that famous ponytail. So, back in 1988, Baggio converted to Nichiren Buddhism. And this wasn't some casual thing. It became a fundamental part of who he was. He said that his practice, his chanting, was what gave him the strength to deal with the insane pressure of his career. This spiritual side of him is absolutely crucial to understanding his resilience later on. And this really gets at the core of the man. You've got these two sides, right? On the field, he's all electric dribbling, incredible showmanship, and world record price tags. But off the field, he's a devout Buddhist, a very private family man, and just a deeply thoughtful person. He was a global superstar with the soul of a philosopher. Okay, so keeping all that in mind, let's go back to 1994. Let's see how this wild combination of skill and spirit was put to the absolute ultimate test. Let's talk about the hero's burden. So Italy actually had a really shaky start to that 1994 World Cup, and Baggio, well, he basically put the team on his back and dragged them to the final almost by himself. I mean, look at this. He scores a last-gasp winner against Nigeria. He scores the winner against Spain in the quarterfinal. Then he scores both goals against Bulgaria in the semifinal. He was the Italian team. He was literally carrying the hopes of the entire country. And that brings us full circle, right back to that final. After 120 grueling, scoreless minutes, the biggest game in the world goes to penalties. And the weight of a nation, a weight he'd been carrying the entire tournament, it all came down to that one final kick from its best player. When you know the context, that moment feels even more intense. So the real question is, what happened next? How do you even respond to something like that? And how did that one moment of failure somehow transform into something else? This is where we find his true legacy, a legacy of grace. Now look, Baggio was honest. He said that miss haunted him for years, that he had nightmares about it. But he never, ever made excuses. He always talked about it with this kind of Buddhist acceptance, seeing it as just one part of his journey, not the thing that defined him. And that reaction, that ownership, that grace, that's the key to his entire legacy. His career after that penalty wasn't some desperate attempt to win a trophy to make up for it. It was more like a search for joy. Yeah, he played for huge clubs like AC Milan and Inter, but his most memorable years were at smaller clubs like Bologna and especially Brescia. He finished his career there in 2004, playing with the sense of freedom and happiness that was just beautiful to watch. And that is why, in Italy, Roberto Baggio is so much more than a football legend. He's a cultural icon. He's loved, of course, for his insane talent, but he's also loved for his humanity, his spirituality, and yes, even for his vulnerability. Fans saw their own struggles in him, and they loved him for it. Which brings us right back to that question we started with. How can failure become a triumph? Well, Baggio himself gave us the answer. He once said, "The penalties I've missed have taught me more about life than any I have scored." And that really leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it? Maybe true victory isn't about never failing. Maybe it's about how we get back up.